Welcome to the third part of me yapping about the Sonic series in my Sonic Mega Retrospective. Last time we've already taken a look at most of the undisputed mainline Sonic games, and we've already delved into the library of Sonic games on the Game Gear and found a surprisingly agreeable level of quality. So this time all that's left is the section of Sonic games that's usually a more sidelined part of the Sonic franchise. Get ready for Dims, Fairy Tales, and a whole bunch of 2D platformers. Get some snacks, sit back, and I hope you enjoy. Sonic 3D Blast is an isometric platformer released in 1996 for the Sega Mega Drive, and basically is the console equivalent of Sonic Labyrinth. The game was advertised and obviously named after its so-called 3D graphics. I mean, whether this game is truly 3D may come down to philosophy, since there are 3 axes, but let's be honest, it isn't. It doesn't look that great in general. It tries to go the Donkey Kong Country route and have pre-rendered sprites, but since the backgrounds are made from normal 16-bit tiles, they just end up sticking out and create some weird perspective. The opening cutscene being a 3D animated FMV on a 4MB Mega Drive cartridge while still making it look good is very impressive, however. It plays rather similarly to the Game Gear game. You're dropped into an isometric level and have to collect the 5 flickies held by the enemy badniks and bring them to the exit. A very similar concept to the 3 keys from Sonic Labyrinth. Except that here the collectibles scatter and start running around when you get it, which makes the collection of them totally not annoying. The levels are much bigger, longer and convoluted in my opinion, and usually are segmented into multiple areas per act. Meaning you collect the flickies, get to the exit and just come out at the other end to do it again in the same level, which makes the levels overstay their welcome. The game also controls more sluggishly than Labyrinth does. Sonic feels like he's running on soap the entire time and it's more difficult to tell if you're gonna hit the enemy or not. All in all, I would say Sonic Labyrinth is just a much better version of this game. Sonic the Fighters is an arcade game released in 1996, a tournament fighter starring basically the entire Sonic cast that existed at the time. The main Sonic team, Amy Rose, Metal Sonic, even Espio from Knuckles Chaotix and Fang from Sonic Triple Trouble. Even Bean and Bark are here, which are new in this game but later became Fang's goons in later appearances. Each of them have a vastly different moveset, with some of them having vastly superior gimmicks. You fight each of the characters one after another in different stages based on Sonic 2 and 3 with the characters you chose. Some fights are harder than others, like against Tails who keeps picking you up, or against Fang who oh my god, he's brought a gun! The run culminates in a pretty tough final boss segment where you first fight the character you play, then Metal Sonic and finally Dr. Robotnik on the Defect 2. Robotnik, that's the 4th Defect 2 he presented just this week. The moveset of the player is pretty intricate and I'm pretty sure I only used a fraction of what I could actually do. Sonic has this very satisfying and powerful forward kick that makes the enemy slam and squish into the wall behind them. Speaking of animations, they are very exaggerated and cartoonish, giving this a very violent but funny slapstick feeling. I'm not a big fighting game guy, but I think this one's pretty okay. Sonic R is a platformer/racing game released in 1997 for the Sega Saturn. A game that I've mostly only ever heard negative things about, but I have a lot of positive things to say about it. It's an original take on the racing genre mixed heavily with platformer tropes. Most of the characters are not in vehicles but running instead. You know, because they're fast, it's kind of the thing of this franchise. You can jump as you like and it's basically like a rough early 3D Sonic platformer. The stages, of which there are only 5, which is kind of lacking, are also very open, like a little 3D diorama platformer stage, you know. There's a normal set road you can take, but the coolest thing about this game is that there are tons of alternative routes. You can even collect the Chaos Emeralds across the stages, which are hidden behind ring gates to unlock Super Sonic. I had a ton of fun with this game. It controls better than I expected, although sharp corners are a bit of a pain. The levels are surprisingly not confusing, even though the map is a bit useless. I find the idea of Sonic characters racing on foot is incredibly obvious, and combining it with platformer collectathon gameplay is brilliant. I honestly wish they would retry this idea in a modern release, although not considering how fast 3D Sonic games are nowadays and nobody wants to play a Sonic game where Sonic moves at this speed. This is probably one idea that we will never see again, but for what it's worth, I think this game pulled it off more than well enough. Also, the soundtrack is an absolute 10 out of 10 fire. Sonic's Pocket Adventure is a nowadays rather obscure Sonic game. It released in 1999 for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, a rather obscure handheld device. Both were developed by SNK. It's a 2D Sonic platformer, as you are all very aware by now. Curiously, it's mostly a best of the Genesis games. Basically all of the level ideas are derived from Sonic 2, and the music is mostly from the Sonic 3 soundtrack. As derivative as the game is, however, the gameplay is similarly good, playing really fast without slowdowns, fun level design and nice animations for its hardware. There's even some cool boss fights against Knuckles and Silver Sonic. The original bosses against Dr. Robotnik are also pretty cool. There's this physics-based boss in a secret plant zone with 2 rotating platforms that move freely based on how you interact with them. Another interesting one is the boss of the gigantic Angel Zone. That isn't anything special itself, kind of a retread of the Egg Vortex from Sonic 3, in that it drops explosives that you can use to propel yourself upwards to hit him. The special thing here is that these are just normal ass bombs. You have to jump onto the explosions, you have to stand on the mushroom cloud. Sonic is officially at his strongest in this game. Fun fact, this game is technically the connecting piece between the classic and modern era. Robotnik has his classic look for most of the boss fights, but when you enter the boss room of the gigantic Angel Zone, you run into Eggman wearing his modern outfit, which you will wear for the remainder of the game. I assume they did this since this is the first game that came out since Sonic Adventure. I mean, Adventure is literally in its name. They probably intentionally did this to bridge the games more. Sonic Advance 1 was developed by DIMS, a studio founded by largely the same people that worked on Sonic Pocket Adventure. It released in 2001 for the Game Boy Advance. It takes after Pocket Adventure and the classic Genesis games as 2D platformers for the modern age. The sprites and art direction are absolutely beautiful. I'm a big fan of GBA era 16-bit sprites, and this is some of the finest I've ever seen. It's the first 2D Sonic game to make use of the modern Sonic designs. They beautifully translate their new designs into 16-bit sprite art. Likewise, the zones and other animations look great, pop and are full of character. Apart from the fact that, yet again, these zones are more or less, but mostly more, heavily inspired by classic Sonic stages. You've got a new Gwyn Hill, new Ice Cap, new Casino Night and so on. The gameplay heavily feels like a modernized version of the classic games, playing almost identically except now that there are grind rails. My biggest gripe about this particular game is the overall level design. The game doesn't flow as well as earlier or later Sonic games and is more focused on being a platformer. In the later stages there are a million instant death pits. It does however have the tiny Chao garden, which makes this whole game fucking awesome. Sonic Advance 2 is the follow-up to Sonic Advance 1. In its core it's the same concept as the first game, but a bit more refined. It's a hell of a lot more fast paced and has a better flow to it, although I do believe that it has some more blind jumps and death pits. The boss fights in this game are quite special. There are all these running boss fights in which you are constantly moving and are fighting a moving vehicle. This is a first in the Sonic franchise, I'm pretty sure, and is an idea that later got reused often in the Boost era. These boss fights in this game are a neat idea, but are absolutely horrendous to actually play. It takes ages to build up momentum, the physics are all messed up and some of them have annoying as pattern attacks. This wheel fight being the worst of them by far. Advance 2 also introduces Queen the Rabbit, her child Cheese and her mother Vanilla, who not much later turned into quite important side characters in the later mainline games. Most of the other gameplay is very similar to Advance 1. As I said, it flows better, it's faster paced, there's more boosting platforms. Some might say it plays itself, but I prefer this game, at least overall, to Advance 1. Sonic Advance 3 is the third one of the series and plays like a sort of mix of Advance 1 and 2, having both fast paced and more platforming focused sections. The standout thing of this entry is the partner gameplay. Instead of playing one character per playthrough, you can instead make a team of 2 characters a la Sonic 2. Varying partner combinations will allow you to use different partner abilities. Having Tails as your partner is more movement oriented, Knuckles is more fighting based, and so on. This allows different playthroughs to feel vastly different, as there are many different pathways and collectibles to find. Advance 3 also features an overworld for each zone that you traverse in to find the next acts. It's rather small, but finding the next act can be a bit annoying at times. As with the other 2 Advance games, there are way too many things to randomly run into, mostly due to hardware-induced screen crunch. There's a bit more to it story-wise, however, as it features Jammerl, one of Eggman's bots he built in resemblance of Emerald from GBA game Sonic Battle. You fight him a couple of times and he's part of every boss fight in the game. There isn't much more to it, however, but it's neat that it connects to a different game like that. This was still an era of Sonic where they cared about things like story and intent. This one is arguably the best one of the 3, but I would probably prefer to replay the other 2, mostly because I really do not like the overworld. Sonic Rush is a game for the Nintendo DS released in 2005, also developed by DIMS. It's the start of a second DIMS trilogy, this time surrounding the debut of the boost formula that would later be popularized by Sonic Unleashed. It also first introduces Blaze the Cat as a princess from a parallel dimension, even though in other games she's framed as being from the future. Blaze, basically being Sonic's counterpart from her dimension, sets out to stop Eggman Neger, Dr. Eggman's counterpart, while hers and Sonic's dimensions start fusing. The plot here doesn't have much of a focus and is told in maybe like 10 cutscenes. The game, much like most of our handheld games, primarily focuses on the gameplay. Since it's made by the same people that made the Advanced trilogy, you can really tell the overall influence in level design and flow, except that they thankfully toned down the instant death traps. The biggest change comes with the boost gimmick. Hold down the Y button and Sonic starts boosting through an enemy and object lying in front of him. While airborne, you are able to do various tricks that fill up the boost gauge. These tricks can also be used for vertical and horizontal movement, allowing you to get to areas you wouldn't have been able to otherwise. The combination of these 2 features makes for an immensely satisfying experience, making Sonic Rush a challenge of keeping your boost gauge and combo as high as possible, trying to boost and trick through the stage as long as you can. There are stages with some weird or unnecessary gimmicks, but nothing that really stands in the way of your enjoyment. There are these rooms, for example, in which you need to defeat a few waves of enemies before being allowed to proceed, which really halts the flow of the stage, but there's rather few of them and they don't take that long, so it's nothing too egregious. Since this game came out on the Nintendo DS, it's being played on both screens at once. The 2 screens are used as one big vertical screen. Sonic passes through to the bottom or the top one if you go through specific sections, which may seem odd, but feels very natural and it's just kinda neat. The boss fights are a minor con of Sonic Rush. None of them are offensively bad, but most of them control the pace of the fight, making them take unnecessarily long, while also not really being a challenge. The final boss against the Egg King was pretty cool, however, especially for the Nintendo DS hardware. If there's one more thing that needs to be mentioned, it's the music. Sonic Rush has an immense and kinda weird soundtrack, a lot of vocalizations and voice samples and stuff like that. Not necessarily to my personal taste, but you can't deny that there's some bangers in there. Sonic Rush Adventure is a direct sequel to Sonic Rush. This game takes place on a series of islands after Sonic and Tails crash land after flying into a thunderstorm. It's later revealed this time you're actually in Blaze's home dimension as she's present again as well. It features mostly the same gameplay for its levels as its predecessor, boosting and doing tricks, with the biggest change being that there's a sort of overworld now. In order to traverse these islands you need a boat. How does the boat get to the other islands? You draw a line on a map with the stylus, like in The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, and the boat goes there. What follows is an excruciatingly long minigame which you have to do every single time you go to another island. As if that is enough padding, you also have to acquire parts to upgrade your boat so that you can even set sail to the next areas. You get those parts by playing through the levels, which means you have to play through these various levels over and over again to acquire the parts that you need. These factors combined make for an excruciatingly tedious experience. The level design is mostly the same in quality and the boss fights are a little bit better, utilizing both screens now and being a bit more creative, but that doesn't help much if the entire rest of the game is really not that great. Unless you like replaying the levels and getting better at them and you don't mind the traveling between the islands, but that really isn't for me. The story is about some robot pirates trying to find a powerful treasure, but surprise surprise it was the two Eggmans all along. Also there's just so much dialogue. You can skip it if you like, but there are so many cutscenes. Just in the opening of the game you have as many cutscenes as the entirety of the first game had. This game could have been great, but the relentless backtracking and replaying the levels over and over just kill the experience in my opinion. Sonic Colors TS is a handheld port of Sonic Colors. Technically the third game in the Sonic Rush trilogy, it utilizes mostly the same gameplay as the previous two entries, adding the wisps from Sonic Colors obviously. The gameplay is as fast and fluent as ever. The trick system is gone now, you charge the boost gauge by running into wisp capsules or enemies now. And obviously you have the colored wisps acting as temporary power-ups like in the console version. These sections may seem a little intrusive at times, but they are fun for what they are. Like Sonic Rush, the world map is kept as a menu, so you can go from level to level without many intrusions, although it does have a lot of dialogue like Sonic Rush Adventure did. The bosses again are alright at best, nothing too grand, although a couple of them have a secret fast way to defeat them that usually incorporates the wisp power of that world, which is just kinda neat. The final boss, just like the console version, is the Nega Wisp armor, and they translated the fight pretty well into DS in my opinion. It uses the wisp powers and you have a final moment using all the wisps at once. Obviously that moment can't compete with the incredible scene of the console version, but it's really awesome for what it is. Sonic the Hedgehog, or Sonic 06 for short, is a game infamously bad and horrible, released in 2006 for that current console generation. And because it's so bad and horrible and tedious, I decided not to play it. Instead I played Project 06, a fan remake currently still in development that aims to iron out the problems of the original and make it actually enjoyable and good. Did I say good? I meant perhaps one of the best modern Sonic experiences of all time. The gameplay is phenomenal, some of the best Sonic to date. In Sonic 06 we have 3 storylines: Sonic, Shadow and the newly introduced Silver. Project 06 at the time of this video is still missing the boss fights, cutscenes and overworld. In other words, it only has the 8 action stages of each character. Sonic's focus is on speed and parkour, just running around, doing tricks and just generally platforming through the stages. His movement feels amazing and is probably my favorite Sonic gameplay I've ever played. Shadow's focus is more on fighting and destruction. He has a few more combat options and his stages often incorporate a sort of fully armed vehicle like a buggy with a rocket launcher or gliding with machine guns. With him I found it incredibly fun to try to stay airborne as long as you can, chaining various attacks to take out as many enemies at once as possible. The enemies in this game ragdoll when defeated, which is just always a treat. Silver's gameplay revolves around puzzle solving. He's a hedgehog from the future who came to the past to stop the apocalypse that plagues his time. But I wouldn't know that since Project 06 doesn't have the story yet, but anyway. For some unexplained reason, Silver the Hedgehog has telekinesis, with which you can pick up enemies and objects and fling them around. More than once it's used for puzzles within his levels. He's generally slower paced than Sonic and Shadow and also has a bit of a focus on combat. The set pieces feel lively and vast. You also play as some of the other members of the cast. Tails and Knuckles in Sonic's story, Rouge and Omega in Shadows, and Blaze and Amy in Silver's. These characters all have different movesets and are all fun to play for what short sections they have. This game is basically what Sonic 06 was meant to be, or rather what it should have been. I'll be watching the progress and final updates Chaos X will be adding to complete the project with very attentive eyes. Go download and support this project. It's such a love letter to Sonic 06? Question mark? To the Sonic franchise in general. I would be very glad for this project to be finished, and this is very much the tried and true way to play Sonic 06 nowadays. Go check it out and support the creator. Sonic Rivals was released for the PlayStation Portable and is very rarely talked about, so I was curious to check it out to see what it's all about. Basically it's a mix of a standard 2D Sonic and a racing game. A large majority of the levels in this game are foot races against other characters in a 2D environment that plays similarly to the Rush games with some extra quirks like sliding and some other gimmicks. You can attack the other characters and they can attack you, and there are item boxes that can change your tide on occasion. Some of the races can be quite difficult. According to the internet, this game doesn't have rubber banding, as in that the CPU in the lead will slow down and the CPUs behind you become better or faster, but I barely felt it at all. The game is a constant struggle for power, and once you fall behind it's pretty much over. You have 2 acts per zone and then a boss fight. The bosses are pretty creative. You fight them against another character, meaning a CPU character will also run around the boss arena and try to damage the boss himself. And whoever gets 6 hits in first wins, which makes you effectively fight against 2 separate entities at once. The gameplay as a whole isn't too in-depth, but it's really fun for what it is. There is a story. Eggman Nega from the Sonic Rush games uses a camera to transform people into playing cards. By the end of the game he tries to turn the whole planet into a card at once. For Sonic's storyline he's entirely in disguise as Dr. Eggman. I'm pretty sure normal Eggman doesn't even canonically appear in this game. The story is told in very awkwardly and stilted dialogue, and it's not exactly the most enticing story ever told in Sonic. The finale is pretty special in that they ditch the race gimmick entirely, and you do the last 2 normal stages as if it's a normal 2D Sonic game. The final boss is a little bit nothing though. One other thing to point out is the graphics. I know it's a game for a handheld device, but good god, the backgrounds and stuff look rough sometimes. Other than that, I think it's a perfectly fun game, but there are some things that could be ironed out. Sonic Rivals 2 is basically the same as its predecessor, just more fleshed out. It looks noticeably better, there's voice acting now, and there's much more variety in the goals of some of the levels. Like collect so and so many rings or collect more rings than your rival, which are pretty cool bits of variety. Other than that, the standard gameplay is pretty much exactly the same, so agreeably fun. This time you have 3 acts per zone and then a boss fight. The second act being a fist fight against the other characters, a sort of mini boss fight. These fights can be cool, but they're also a little bit off place in my opinion. Probably would have been better if there were fewer of those encounters, but it's okay. The normal boss fights here were nothing too different, again against the rival character. They all have some kind of gimmick you need to figure out that more than once was more annoying than fun. The final boss in this game was cooler than the first rivals however. It's against the Ifrit, a fiery demon legally distinct from Iblis from Sonic 06. A fiery demon from another dimension that Eggman Nega wants to release into Sonic's dimension. All in all, it's just a much better rounded game than Rivals 1. If you wanna play one of them, definitely play this one. But I'm not sure if it's a must play per se. Sonic and the Secret Rings is a borderline mainline game released for the Nintendo Wii in 2007. Apart from everything else that can be said about this game, it's probably one of the contributing factors why Sonic 06 turned out the way it did. The development team was split during 06's production. for one half to create this game, an auto runner taking place in the world of the Arabian Nights. The story gets set off by Chandra, the genie of the ring, appearing in front of Sonic and asking him to come into her world to stop the Eraser Djinn, the genie of the lamp. And yes, look it up, in the original story there are 2 genies. He agrees and gets sent into the storybook. The story is told in cutscenes made from still frames, and the writing is not very engaging or entertaining and borderline tiresome. Some of the characters in the story are depicted as some of the other Sonic characters, which is kinda charming though. The game more or less looks like a boost game, except that he runs forward automatically and is on a set path. You move from side to side by tilting the Wiimote. In fact, you make most of the actions with various movements of the Wiimote, which works about as well as you expect. The game has a mission structure. Basically you do one normal level and then 10 missions like defeat X enemies or destroy X pods in the same level before you can continue, which I personally don't like at all. For what it's worth, the environments look pretty good. It's just a shame it takes an hour of gameplay to see a new one. This is the first game in the Storybook series, a series of games in which Sonic travels to the world of various fictitious stories. Sonic and the Black Knight is the sequel to Secret Rings and the second and last game in the Storybook series. It improves on pretty much everything Secret Rings did tenfold. This time Sonic plummets into the world of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. He is called by a sorcerer called Melina who begs him to stop the evil King Arthur. Sonic, having no quarrels with fighting the established government, agrees and wields a goddamn sword in this game, and it's just so fucking awesome. The story here is told in stills that are more animated and expressive than in Secret Rings, which, combined with more charming writing, makes the cutscenes actually pretty fun to watch. At the side is the sword Caliburn, which some scholars out there might realize already is the original name of Excalibur. The gameplay is also much improved. This time you play with the Wiimote and Nunchuck, allowing you to actually move freely in the game. No more auto runner. The levels are still on a set path more or less, but generally much more akin to the boost era levels. You swing the sword by swinging the Wiimote and it's just fucking awesome. The combat does get a bit stale eventually, but the game is only like 3 hours long, and it's fun the whole way through. The game still has a sort of mission structure, but toned down by a lot. You mostly go through new and original stages, and only sometimes go through similar levels for one-off missions. These are mostly thanks to vastly improved controls and gameplay, and thus more welcome than the missions in Secret Rings. Along the way you also meet the Knights of the Round Table, which are depicted as Sonic characters. The boss fights against them, but the bosses in general are the highlights of the game. You fight dragons, King Arthur himself, and some demon god thing as super duper Excalibur Sonic. The final boss is pretty easy, but I don't know, he's still cool. The writing of Sonic as a character really shines here. He's cocky, confident, headstrong, and does what he thinks is right, not what some might say would be the objectively better thing. Somewhere at the beginning of the game he says he doesn't mind playing the bad guy once in a while, if it's that what it takes to do what he thinks is right. Sonic's characterization throughout the game just really shines here. This game is just total and complete rule of cool awesomeness combined with pretty decent gameplay and some examples of incredible music. One of my personal favorites of this batch of games, and it's just really fucking awesome. Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 was the grand return of the 2D classic normal vanilla flavor no nonsense Sonic formula with no other characters or extravagant story, just basic ass Sonic vs Eggman. It's a weird mix of being a remake and reimagining of Sonic 1 and 2 combined. The zones, enemies and even boss fights are entirely influenced by those two games. Sonic 4 stands out however by having the homing attack, which is kinda neat I suppose, and being ugly as all hell. I mean, Sonic especially just sticks out like a sore thumb. Other than that, the game is reasonably fun I think. The zones feel neatly interactable and have some neat gimmicks. The bosses are mediocre and the boss music does not make them better. But all in all I think this game is pretty innocent fun. The game gets a lot of hate, but I don't think it really deserves it. Maybe at the time it was a bit of a letdown, but it's not really a slog to play through, it just looks worse if you notice how lazy it really is. At the end of the day, it's the most 5 out of 10 Sonic ever, probably. But I wonder what the episode 1 in the title stands for. Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2 is the sequel to Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, and yes, it is a sequel. These are not episodic entries of one whole Sonic 4, this might as well be called Sonic the Hedgehog 5, but okay. Sonic 4 Episode 2 is better than Episode 1, all things considered. The zones are still heavily inspired by Genesis Sonic, but as a whole it's much more original. With original boss fights, generally more inspired level themes and stuff like that. They even poke fun at the fact how derivative Episode 1 was by having the first boss, who is in a zone quite similar to Aquatic Ruin from Sonic 2, start just like the boss fight in that zone, only for the real 100% original boss to surprise attack instead. Tails is here too, and you can do some team powers with him, like flying or doing a super duper mega spin dash that you need to do occasionally. Sonic and the environment also look leagues above Episode 1. Metal Sonic is also here and you race against him, and that's pretty cool. With Tails and Metal Sonic being here, this is kind of the second entry of the classic trilogy counterpart. There was supposed to be an Episode 3 featuring Knuckles, but due to low reception it was scrapped. But fret not, for technically there is a Sonic 4 episode trilogy. Included in Episode 2 is also Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode Metal. That finally answers the question, what happened to Metal Sonic after Sonic CD? How did he return from Little Planet after it disappeared at the end of that game? He got reactivated and flew home. I suppose this technically is an official connecting piece between the classic and modern games, so that's pretty neato, I suppose. In this short little 20-minute in and out adventure, you play as Metal Sonic, who plays exactly like normal Sonic, going backwards through the level themes of Episode 1 to chase down Sonic. It's kind of cool, I guess. All in all, Sonic 4 Episode 2 is better than Episode 1 and just a pretty standard 2D Sonic game. Nothing really offensive about it. You can play it, I guess, but why would you if you have better things at your disposal? It's pretty fun, I enjoyed it, but it's like the most 6.5 out of 10 in the franchise. For the 20th anniversary of the Sonic franchise, we got this example of a masterpiece. Sonic Generations, a celebration of the entire franchise, all 9 games of it. In Sonic Generations, Sonic celebrates his birthday, only for the party to be crashed by a not further developed creature called the Time Eater, who grabs Sonic and his friends and flings them throughout time and space, only for Sonic to be the last one standing, so it's up to him to race through the areas of his past and rescue his friends and put the timeline back in order. Along the way he also runs into his younger self, Classic Sonic. You play Act 1 in 2D as Classic Sonic and Act 2 in 3D boost style as Modern Sonic. The gameplay for both of these styles is magnificent, by far the best entry of the Sonic Boost formula. In the game you have 9 zones, each corresponding to a major title in the Sonic franchise, segmented in 3 eras. Classic era with Green Hill, Chemical Plant and Sky Sanctuary, Adventure era with Speed Highway, City Escape and Seaside Hill, and the Modern era with Crisis City, Rooftop Run and Planet Wisp. You also have a total of 6 legacy boss fights, reimagined major bosses from the past, 3 of which are against Sonic's personal rivals that are framed as races. The boss fights are also really fun and beautiful fanservice. The legacy content is wonderfully picked and beautifully reimagined with tons of references and love for the series. I just wish there would have been a few more zones. Only 9 zones in a series with, even at that point, dozens of entries. I feel like there's major stuff unexplored here. Maybe one more era for handheld games. The Game Gear stuff is unrepresented, Advance and Rush. Granted, I do prefer quality over quantity and that is what we got, but it does irk me a little. Same with the story, that doesn't need to be much of a story since it's just a framing device to return to locations and scenarios from the past. But that could have been done so much more with this concept, and the Time Eater is completely unexplained. Apart from the fact that Classic and Modern Equipment were binded all along, but meh. The final boss is also baffling. To this day I do not know what to do in this boss fight. You just kinda win eventually, and I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. But all in all, what else could I say about Sonic Generations? For years now it's been regarded as one of the best Sonic games of all time. There's great gameplay, great levels, great boss fights, great music, great fan service. What more could you want from an anniversary title except like more of it? Well, la di da, look what I found. More Generations. Shadow Generations released quite recently in a bundle with a re-release of Sonic Generations. But nobody cared about that part because everybody was caught up with the new and cool Shadow game. This is basically more Sonic Generations, except arguably even better gameplay and level design. You play as Shadow, who goes through basically the same journey Sonic went through, except that Black Doom from the Shadow the Hedgehog game is here looking for revenge, and Maria and Jared Robotnik are also here. I was quite excited to see Maria and Shadow interact, but their actual interactions in the game, much like the story at large, left me rather cold. Shadow goes through areas targeted towards his personal history. You got the Space Colony arc and a lot of Radical Highway from Adventure 2, Rail Canyon, Kingdom Valley and Sunset Heights, and Chaos Island from Sonic Frontiers, a game that Shadow wasn't in, but alright. The boss fights here too are against enemies from Shadow's personal past. Major differences to Sonic Generations are that you have a 3D open world that you use to go from place to place, that is quite fun to rush through like an openly explorable level with tons of collectibles to find. Shadow also gains a few new cool powers, the Doom powers that just look like as if Shadow was hit by venom. You can use a manta ray creature to surf on water and turn into a squid thing to go through Doom stuff. It's still debated if it's better than Sonic Generations, but this package, Sonic X Shadow Generations, is basically the best Sonic deal you could possibly get. Shadow Generations is... I'm still warming up to it, if it's actually better than Sonic Generations, but it's very close. These are both quality titles. I think Sonic Generations I still prefer due to nostalgia, but Shadow Generations is just so good that it's so close to breaking that nostalgia. It's just a shame that the story is not as far developed, just like Sonic Generations, as I would have liked. Maria and Jared Robotnik coming back should have been such a big deal for the franchise, but it's not that well explored. They have like 3 minutes of screen time and it's kind of lukewarm in my opinion. But the gameplay is phenomenal. That was the third part of my Sonic the Hedgehog Super Duper retrospective. This was mostly a collection of a bunch of random outliers I hadn't come around to play yet. It's taken a lot longer than I expected, but we're almost getting to the end of Sonic now. To think that this started at the beginning of September simply because I wanted to play Sonic Adventure 2 sometime. The rest from here on out should be nothing more than a bunch of spin-offs and Unleashed that I should be able to cover in one last part of the retrospective. Thank you all so much for the support and I'll see you next time.